Hey guys, back for another ruling video, this time for Opus 4. Now because we have a new card type, I'm going to cover that quickly before we get into specific rulings. The new type is monsters. Monsters are still characters, so things that affect characters affect monsters as well. A good example is the Emperor. Lots of monsters have action abilities, the Emperor will prevent them using those. Monsters don't have summoning sickness, so they can use their dull abilities the turn they enter play, and they don't generate CP. That is just a backup thing. As for where they go on the playmat, you can essentially put them anywhere. There's no specific rule. I like to put them kind of next to the forwards, like kind of to the left, but a little bit down, so they're not in line with them. Some people put them between forwards backups, but yeah, that's pretty much up to you, whatever works for you. Monsters can become a forward through effects. This is the harder part. Often it's their own effect. But the important thing to remember is that they are still the same card. They're also still treated as a monster. So they're both treated as a monster and a forward while they're a forward. But because they're the same card, they retain their card state, whether they're active, dull, or frozen. It remembers when it enters the field. That's the important part, because when a monster is treated as a forward, it actually does have summoning sickness, because that's a rule of forwards. However, it still remembers when it entered, and so it can still attack or use dull abilities if it's been in play since your active phase, even though it wasn't a forward at that time. So you play a monster. If you turn it into a forward that turn, it can't attack, because it knows it hasn't been in play since your active phase. However, if you play a monster, and then next turn you turn it to a forward, it does remember that it's been in play long enough to attack, and so it can actually attack, even though it wasn't a forward before. So if you take one thing away from this video, that's probably the best one, the most important one, because that definitely has tripped a lot of people up, and it's kind of really hard to explain succinctly, but also clearly. But yeah, moving on to specific cards. Caius has auto ability. The second ability when he attacks, discarding a Behemoth happens at resolution if you choose to do so. Cyan has special ability Bushido Fang. The important thing about this is that at the beginning of your main phase, it has to be the same copy of Cyan in play. So if you use his special ability and then he gets removed before your main phase, even if you bring another one out or bring one back from your grave, that still will not break the forward at the beginning of main phase. It has to be the copy that used the special in the first place. Secondly, if you target a monster that's currently being treated as a forward, that is a legal target because it's a forward, even though it won't be a forward at the beginning of your main phase, Cyan actually still breaks it, which is pretty cool. All it cares about is that when it initially used its special, the character is a forward. It does not need it to still be a forward when it resolves at the beginning of your main phase. Sage, there's a lot of effects like this in Opus 4, which is cool. Just remember that it also includes damage the forward would deal by abilities, not just combat damage. So this combos with things like Barbarisha, for example. Shadow, as with most of all effects that check the cost of a card, it checks the printed cost. So if you have something like Una, reduce the cost of your summon, that won't reduce the damage that you deal with Shadow by removing that summon. Marche, there's a couple cards like this in Opus 4, where it says dull one active forward. That's part of the cost. So even though it doesn't specify your own forward, it does mean your own forward. That is just like Lulu, Amarant, Mystic. Just remember, costs are always paid with your own characters. You cannot use your opponent's characters for that. Secondly, with Marche, the forward blocking him, it's only a legal target while he's blocking him. So if Marche actually gets removed in response to his effect, then Marche doesn't resolve, because the target is no longer legal because it is no longer blocking Marche. However, if the forward that you dull for his cost does get removed in response to his effect actually will still resolve. Even though it says deal damage for the power of the dull forward, it doesn't actually need that forward to be there when it resolves. It'll just use the last known information from it. All it cares about is the forward that was used. It doesn't care what happens to it. So you can just basically, as an opponent, you can stop Marche's ability by removing Marche, but you can't stop it by removing the forward they dulled for its cost, or even dulling it yourself. That still doesn't stop it either. Activating it rather. Montblanc, just quickly, his action ability, where you have to control Marche to activate it, you don't have to control Marche for it to resolve. So even if Marche gets removed in response to Montblanc, you'll still do 2000 damage. Llednar is very similar to Kuja. It's got auto abilities, so one of its auto abilities triggers. When it resolves, that's when they get the option to pay 2, and if they don't, then he will gain that lingering effect where he can't be broken that turn. But just remember that if they choose to pay, it's actually at the resolution of his auto ability. Shiva, this should be pretty straightforward, but I'm just going to mention it anyway. It doesn't include itself, so the copy that you cast is not included in the count for its effect, because that's actually on the stack, it's not in the break zone yet. Cid Randell looks similar to Ultimisha, but it's not. Ultimisha has a field ability, which means that something like Guy just enters play dull, whereas Cid Randell is an auto ability that triggers when their forward enters play. So if something like Guy enters play, it'll trigger, but they can just not pay, and then it won't be able to be dulled, because that's what Guy's ability does. Celes, her special, Runic, you have to use it in response to a summon. You can't just use it to activate her whenever you want. Also, if the summon is cancelled in response, like, so if the summon is cancelled before her ability resolves, then you also won't activate her. She has to be the one cancelling the summon to activate herself. Ezel, that is an auto ability that triggers in response to the summon and will stack to the summon. So because it resolves first, something like Shiva will still work, because Shiva will activate, Ezel triggers, Ezel resolves, then Shiva resolves after that and redulls them. Archer, this is pretty cool. If the forward you target uses an AoE damage ability, like an ability that does damage to multiple forwards at the same time, Archer prevents all of the damage, the entire damaging effect, which is really useful. Works against things like Barbarossa and Machina. Now Kefka has quite a few rulings around it. Putting forwards and monsters into the break zone is an alternate cost rather than paying CP. So it happens at the same time you would generate CP, and it doesn't let you play him during your opponent's turn or anything like that, or it is the speed. It's just an alternate cost to pay when you would normally play a character, so during your main phase. You can do a mixture of monsters and forwards, so you can do like, 2 monsters, 1 forward, or it doesn't have to be 3 monsters or 3 forwards. Last thing is, if you already have a Kefka in play, like a forward Kefka, you actually can't play this Kefka by sacrificing that Kefka. You're actually not allowed to even attempt to play this Kefka, so even if you intend to sacrifice a Kefka you already have, you're not allowed to do that. You cannot play this Kefka if you already have one in play. This is just a really funny rule I had to put in here. If both players have this Shantotto in play, and they both can't be broken for whatever reason, for example, they both use Titan, when one takes damage, it deals damage back to the other will then take trigger and deal damage back to the other Shantotto, and that will actually keep going back and forth and will loop infinitely because they can't be broken. In that case, if neither player interrupts the loop, the game's a draw. That's the rule of loops. If player can't interrupt them, then the game just ends in a draw, which is, it's kind of funny. Dadaluma, if he dies in combat, like dies to the damaging effect, his ability will still trigger. Also, if summon or ability that deals damage is used on him, it will trigger twice, because first it'll trigger in response to the summon or ability when it targets him, then when the ability or summon resolves and deals damage to him, it will trigger again. Next up is Delita. This is the first of a few cards where they kind of send something to the break zone, and if you do something. In these cases, Una Heroic doesn't actually stop these abilities, even though it removes them so they don't actually go to the break zone. All the card like Delita cares about is that itself was the one that got rid of that card off the field. It doesn't care where it ended up. So, yeah, Una will not stop this resolving by removing the forward that it sacrificed. The other thing to note with this card is that that action ability is not like Ash. It does trigger, well, it is like Ash, but it triggers on your own as well, not just your opponent's. So you can actually buff this Delita yourself by targeting it. Hecatoncheir works just like Raubahn. So it's not Hecatoncheir dealing the damage itself, it's actually causing the forwards to deal damage to each other. So if those forwards have abilities that trigger when they deal damage, those abilities will trigger. If a forward is protected by an effect that says it can't take damage from summons, like Celes for example, it will still take damage from the effect due to Hecatoncheir, but it will be the forward dealing the damage. Magic Pot, again, even though as part of the cost it says put a forward to the break zone, it has to be your own because it's part of a cost. The other thing with Magic Pot, this is like Delita, even if the forward gets removed by Una, it still searches for a card with the same name. It doesn't need that card to go to the break zone, it just has to be the one that put it into, that got rid of it off the field to do the search. Raubahn is pretty interesting. What the cool thing about this card is its effect kind of works in your favor because, due to the rulings, I mean. If Raubahn himself gets removed in response to the effect, it still does 9,000 to the target, to the opponent's forward. However, if the opponent's forward is removed in response, he actually doesn't deal the damage to himself because the target was made illegal, so the effect doesn't resolve. So if you can combo him with something like Scholar, for example, where you play him, activate his effect, bouncing in response, therefore still takes the damage. However, if they try and like counter him with their Scholar, for example, they bounce their 40 in response to his effect, he won't kill himself. So it's cool that kind of works in your favour. Warrior, just one thing here, it doesn't combo with Minwu. Just like all of the damage modification effects, the modifier happens, all the modifiers happen before Minwu checks the damage. So yeah, if he takes 4,000 and Minwu's on the field, he'll actually take 8,000 and he'll break. Hildibrand is a bit of a memer. The thing about his effect is it's actually wrong, but it's not the effect itself, it's wrong, it's actually the clarification text, which is supposed to be there to help make it clearer. Where it says he does not return to his hand if he receives damage higher than his power, it actually means damage equal or higher than his power. All that part of the effect is explaining is that if, say, something like Brynhilde is used on him, it's not Brynhilde itself that's breaking him, it's the rules process seeing that he has enough damage to be broken. So yeah, he will not bounce if they use some kind of ability or someone that deals enough damage to kill him. However, he will bounce for effects like Madius, Famfrit, things like that, which remove it in another way, not just breaking effects. So yeah, and that's a field ability, by the way. Because it says instead, that's a replacement effect, that means it's a field ability, it's not an auto ability, so it doesn't trigger in response to the effect, it just sends him to a different place when the effect resolves. Oh, one more thing with Hildibrand. His special ability. If it's actually not legal, if he reveals a forward, and it's not legal for you to bring that into play, either because you already have that character name in play, or it's a light or dark character and you already have a light or dark character in play, the forward just stays on top. It doesn't go to the break zone, it doesn't come to the field and send both itself and the illegal character into the break zone or anything like that, it just stays on top if it can't be legally brought into play. Behemoth is kind of a long effect, so I want to just make this clear. The bottom line, you can only use this ability once per turn, is referring to the monster's action ability to transform itself, not the auto ability that it gains when it becomes a forward. So that auto ability, when it receives damage, deal damage, etc., that can have multiple times a turn. The thing that you can only do once per turn is transform them into a forward. This lightning, I'm not sure why they chose to do it this way, but her last ability there is an action ability, not a special ability. Even though the cost functions the same as a special ability, like S in that position would make you do the same thing, discard a card named Lightning. However, because it's not an S, it's not classified as a special ability. So basically all that means is that it can't be stopped by a Snakebite, it can't be stolen by Ronso Rage. The other thing about it is, obviously when it removes and comes back, it's treated as a new card. So if you activate it somehow, you can attack again, or you can dodge targeting effects, things like that. But yeah, just remember it's not actually classified as a special ability. Now, Clione. This card, alright, firstly, it's got two separate auto abilities. They're not inherently linked, although often the second one triggers when the first one does, resolves rather. But yeah, its first ability is mandatory, so it will trigger on your own summons, for example. If there's multiple on the field, all of them will trigger in response to the same summon. It doesn't trigger in response to EX summons, because that's not actually casting a summon, and EX summon does not count as being cast. It's just the same as something like Garnet. But yeah, again, if Yuna removes Clione for that first auto ability, where it puts itself into the break zone, if Yuna removes it, it will still cancel the summon. However, the second ability, because that's actually a break zone trigger effect, that will not trigger, obviously, if Yuna removes it, because it doesn't actually meet the trigger for the auto ability. I think that's all for that card. PuPu. What a funny looking guy. But yeah, this, you can activate it with no cards in hand and still draw 2 cards. That's all you really need to know here. It's because, you don't have the and if you do conjunction in the middle there or anything like that. The two effects are not dependent on each other. So yeah, even if you use it with no cards in hand, you still draw 2. Steiner, similar to Marche, where it says dull 1 active order forward. That has to be your own forward because it's part of the cost. Mime, its ability sets its printed power to their forward's current power. So if their forward has some kind of buffs or whatever, you'll get those buffs in, set as your printed power. And then also, if you have any buffs though, they will then apply to that printed power. So if you have like a Waka and they have 1 forward in play or whatever, your Mime will actually be bigger than theirs because you'll get their power and then your buffs on top of that. So that actually works quite in your favour, which is pretty good. Now lastly, this is a little bit more generic, but it's only these 2 cards can cause it to happen so far. if you transform a forward twice in the same turn, so it's already a forward being treated as a forward, and then you make it become a forward with another effect, like by Kefka or Relm, all that changes is the forward's printed power changes to the most recent effect. So Bomb, for example, becomes a forward, it uses its own effect, becomes a forward with 5,000 power and that action ability. If you then use Kefka or Relm on it, it'll change its power to 7,000 instead of 5,000. However, everything else stays the same. So it will keep its action ability, which is good. It also keeps any buffs or debuffs, the damage it's taken, anything like that. All that stays because it's still the same card. So all that it will get, it will just gain 2,000. It will just have 2,000 more power than whatever it had before, even if it's been hit by like negative power buffs or anything like that. So yeah, that's just more of a generic thing there. But I definitely thought it was worth mentioning. But yeah, thanks for watching though. If there's anything you want clarified or any other rulings that I didn't mention, feel free to, of course, always ask me. I'll be in Echo Chamber, like you can message me on Facebook or anything like that. Send in the comments if you want. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope that covered everything. Cheers.